Virginians have always stood at the crossroads of the fight for freedom. It is a battle in which we all reap the benefits. World War II was the defining event of the 20th century. It involved 60 countries. Over 57 million people were killed. The nuclear age was launched, and the United States emerged as the world's most powerful nation. World War II was fought in two major theaters of operation: the North African, Mid-Eastern, and European theater, and to the Far East, the Asiatic Pacific theater. 6 months following the devastating attack by the Empire of Japan on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy soundly defeated the Imperial Japanese Navy at the Battle of Midway. Midway, a tiny atoll located in the center of the Pacific Ocean, 1,300 miles northwest of Honolulu, was considered strategic for the control of the Pacific. The Japanese were using the attack on Midway as a tactic to lure the Pacific Fleet into a trap and then annihilate it. This time, the U.S. Navy knew that the Japanese were coming and had a trap of its own.
In the Pacific during World War II, Commander Rochford, Commander Holmes, Commander Layton, and all of the people working in communications intelligence and in the intelligence structure, small as they were at the time, designed and executed this system which we now call OpIntel. That was the birth of OpIntel. And we learned as we went along. And we got more proficient in recovering code groups. We got to the point where by the middle of 1942, including the Battle of Midway, where we could read enough of the Japanese messages, we could almost read them verbatim. When Admiral Yamamoto issued his op order for the Battle of Midway in the latter part of May 1942, we read it almost verbatim and were able to provide Admiral Nimitz 2 weeks in advance of the battle the complete order that Admiral Yamamoto had issued. So he knew in advance what he was faced with, and in time to get his forces out, meager as they were. Japanese forces coming to Midway numbered over 120 ships. Admiral Nimitz had 36 ships total. It was a battle of calculated risk because operators still were not sure that this intelligence was for real.
And we got into Pearl with the Yorktown, which was badly damaged. And Yorktown went into the yard immediately on arrival with an estimate of something like 3 or 4 months to restore her to battle operations. She was out of the yard in 3 days.
But we were in Pearl Harbor 3 days, and we were resupplying and doing everything we could to get the ship back together. And when they got everything below decks patched and they got us out, and we could only do 18 knots, and so we went to Midway.
The Yorktown and Portland and the rest of the ships in the group then steamed on out of Pearl and on up through to the north and northwest of the Hawaiian island chain. In June the 3rd or 4th, dates, have a tendency to get a little fuzzy. The Japanese launched an attack on Dutch Harbor, and we were theoretically on our way to the Aleutians. But as soon as that attack occurred, lo and behold, darn if we didn't turn around and start steaming in a southwesterly direction. This was a case where the intelligence knew a heck of a lot more than us peons in the wardroom knew. The following morning was the attack on Midway. So we were there and the Japanese didn't know it.
All officers were called to the rather spacious area called the wardroom. A senior officer pulled down a very large map of the Pacific, and then he proceeded to lay out in all detail the whole expected Japanese order of battle. We knew, or at least all the officers knew, as of that time, just what was ahead. Now, we also knew that we only had about 37 ships, and if you could do any rough estimating, you knew that they had to have over 100 in those four forces. It didn't seem to faze the people aboard Yorktown at all. Well, they may know generally what's going to happen, but I can't believe they know all this that they're telling us. And yet it turned out to be astonishingly true. Astonishingly true.
Everything was pretty quiet up until the 4th. Because that's the day that the Battle of Midway started. I think it was about 8:30. We found the Japanese carriers, and about 8:30 we launched TBDs and SBDs, the TBDs being the torpedo bombers and the SBDs being the dive bombers. We launched them to attack the Japanese carriers.
Well, there were 3 separate attacks by these TBDs, the torpedo planes by Douglas. These torpedo planes eventually found the Japanese task force, and practically all of them were shot down. There were no hits scored by any of the American planes on any of the Japanese ships. So the Japanese were in, at this particular point, in the early morning of Midway, they were in good shape.
The pilots that were making the attack on Midway at the time of the Battle of Midway were exactly the same pilots and the same airplanes from the same carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December.
The Japanese made their attack on Midway. Midway was waiting for them, all loaded and primed. And the attack, while it caused some damage, the estimate by the Japanese was they needed a second strike immediately.
While the Japanese fighters and everything were knocking off these obsolete torpedo planes, our dive bombers were up the team over the sea. And of course, they were up real high, and all their job was to do was to get the carriers.
And they were in the process of changing their ammunition when the dive bombers from the 2 task groups from Spruance and Mitchell came over and saw the carriers down below, and they just immediately went into a dive, and they were lucky. Right off the bat, they got 3 of the 4 carriers, all within the space of about 5 minutes.
Well, then the Japs in a counterstroke, they hit the Yorktown, the one that had been repaired, and it was in pretty bad shape. And while they were hitting Yorktown, our dive bombers got the last Japanese carrier.
We didn't get hit by the Japanese until about 1 or 1:30. And they announced that there's 37 Japanese coming in, dive bombers coming in on us. And our CAP, our Combat Air Patrol, was out, and they shot down all but about 6 of them. The battle report, I think, said we got hit 3 times. And of course, we were standing still in the water. They'd blown out our boilers again and put the fires out. When a concussion would hit the fire in the boiler, it would just blow it out. It was gone. And then they'd have to light the boilers off again to get them going. They blew general quarters again, and they said we were on a torpedo attack.
About 2 hours later, we got hit by torpedo planes. and that's what did us in. 2 torpedoes hit us on the port side. The ship started listing. It listed to about 13 degrees, and then it listed to 23 degrees. And when that happened, then the flight deck it almost felt like the ship was going to capsize. I think it was about 1,500 that he ordered that we abandon ship.
Fires burning, couldn't get all of the fires out, couldn't get the ship started. We were listing and had reached a critical mass of listing where from then on it's subject to capsizing, so they finally got the order to abandon ship. I got up as high as I could and dived off and swam on the water as far as I could. And I came up in a great big oil slick. I stayed in the water, I suppose, I know it was somewhere between 6 and 8 hours.
So they passed the word of mouth, but I never heard anybody say abandon ship. All I saw was people going over the side. So swimming toward the destroyer, and this is around 4 o'clock, I think it was, around 4:30, 4 o'clock, something like that. And anyway, they got on a submarine alert, and they took off. So I'm sitting out there just paddling along in the salt water, riding those big waves, going down, and it didn't bother me. And then when I started getting tired, I said, well, I don't need these pants anymore. So I took them off, and I let my wallet go, and everything was in my pants. I let it go, I dropped my pants, and I took my shirt off. After a while, I was stark naked, and I'm just out there swimming along, and if I got tired, I lay back and float, and I was covered from top to bottom in #1 crude oil. Some guy reached down and grabbed me by my hair, and he grabbed me by my armpits, and 2 of them threw me up on the deck. And being stark naked, I hit that hot deck. I mean, I was like a piece of bacon jumping around in there. Like 144 of us went back aboard the Yorktown, and as a salvage crew, and we worked on it. We got back aboard on the 5th, and we worked on all day the 5th and the 6th, and we were working on the 6th, and then about 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 6th, the Hammond, the destroyer, was tied alongside of us, and it was giving us electrical power and pumps and help pumping out. The tugboat came there, and it threw a line to us, and we started getting underway, and we got alert. Somebody hollered. I didn't hear any noise. All I heard was somebody just hollering torpedoes, and we looked up, and there's 4 torpedoes coming in on the port side, on the starboard side, hit it right straight at us. And 2 of them hit the Hammond and cut it right in 2, and it went down within a minute and a half. 1 hit the Yorktown, 1 went under us, so it didn't hit us. But when the Hammond went down, it was somebody was either putting the safeties back on the mines. He went down with it, went under it, and those mines went off about 50 feet down, and they blew the whole burn out of the Yorktown, blew the bottom out and caved it in. Just about all of us got out on the tugboat just by going over the stern. We didn't have to get in the water that time. We sat there on that tugboat all night long, and the next morning at sunrise, we was watching the Yorktown, and then we could see it it was still sitting there, and we thought sure that it wasn't going to sink. We thought we were going to go back aboard it because it didn't look like it had moved. And then about 5:30, it was about 6:30, it started to roll. And it gradually rolled and started going down by the bow. And it rolled over and rolled right upside down and went down at 6:59. Almost to the minute, 6 months after the war started. It's like watching your house and everything you own go down, burn up and disappear. It's like losing everything you had. You lost your security. You lost all your possessions. And you lost a lot of friends. It's just a blank. You sit there, and it wasn't dry, on that tugboat.
We
didn't even know a battle was going on. Pearl Harbor was just as calm as anything you wanted to ever see. The 4th of June, 1942, we had just got off work and were just cleaning up, and they had a movie topside. And I recalled the movie. The name of the movie was Sergeant York. And we were up there and had halfway through the movie. When the word came, they shut off the movie and passed the word. Make preparations for getting underway. Within 2 hours, we had cast off the lines from the Growler, which was alongside of us, the submarine, and we're heading out. And we got underway at 2200. We had 2 destroyers that were escorting us. When they passed the word that we were going out to pick up some survivors from the Battle of Midway. And we met up with the Portland, which was the heavy cruiser Portland, and a couple of other destroyers. And we were taking aboard more survivors, more of the wounded, and as soon as he hit the deck, we let him out. And some of these guys had hardly any clothes. Some of them were just close to naked. They had been aboard the ship, but the Portland wasn't able to do much for a lot of them at the time. The guys on the Portland tore their blankets in half and gave each man a piece of blanket to wrap himself in. As soon as we got all aboard, we headed for Pearl. And we took off at a massive 17 knots, which was pretty good for a submarine tender. And a lot of the Yorktown survivors were down there, and they started singing. And God, they had a spirit that wouldn't stop, and they were very patriotic songs. They were just full of spirit, ready to go, and none of them were disheartened at all. They hated to lose their ship. They couldn't wait to get back for action, It made our hearts feel good, and we gave them. I know I did. I gave a lot of my clothes to the guys that came aboard without any clothes.
During the battle, I sat at my desk for 72 hours without a break. We were getting the Japanese intercepts, and we were also getting the U.S. Navy reports of action. And we were the only place in the world that had that advantage. We knew, for example, from radio intercept that the 3 Japanese carriers had sunk because the Japanese reported it in their radio traffic, and we knew it. But that was top secret code word, so we couldn't advertise that to the press or to the world that day.
So really in effect what they did is they wiped out the 4 carriers, but primarily, which was the biggest loss to Japan, was their trained Navy aviation personnel. They lost so many of their highly trained Navy pilots and crewmen and their support people for their aircraft carriers. And that's the real, after that, as far as the Japanese Navy was concerned, it was all downhill.
None of us at the time of the Battle of Midway, which was pretty early in the war, we were still all neophytes, none of us realized at that time how significant the Battle of Midway, the victory of Midway, was. We knew that we had sunk 4 Japanese carriers, and that was a big deal. But that's as far as our appreciation went at that point. As time went on, and we saw that the Japanese were never able to recover from that, and they were never able to build enough carriers. We built carriers by the dozen, and they never really recovered military capability-wise. They never recovered from the Battle of Midway, but we didn't realize that really until after the war.
The Japanese Admiral, High Admiral Yamamoto, he told the Japanese warlords that when they started the war, he could run wild for about 6 months or a year. And after that, he said he couldn't predict any Japanese successes because he had seen the United States and he'd seen how big a country we were and how well industrialized we were. And he realized that Japan just couldn't stand up to us.
It was known as the turning point of the war. After the Battle of Midway, we put down the shield and picked up the sword. Up until that point, they were chasing us all the time. They were calling the shots. But after the Battle of Midway, we were chasing them.